Okay, now surprising, our markets are down really. Brokers actually, I spoke to two brokers earlier on in the day, and they said that they felt the market had a positive outlook and will actually close up. But it seems like investors were not so keen today. Do you think it's the end of the rally that we saw at the beginning of the week?
Quite possibly. I mean, typically Friday is a relatively weak day in the market, and I think that the overall sentiment is still fragile. We still have, a very limited conviction from the domestic investors, and the internationals have plenty to be concerned about with regard to evolving risk environment. So I don't see how we can sustain a rally, even though you may see some bottom fissures as the market sells off intermittently.
So does that mean really that you feel that that it's not the end of us seeing the stock exchange sort of picking up after we saw it volatile for the last 3 weeks?
Sorry, I'm not sure I caught your question. Could you repeat it, please?
Well, do you think that it's the end of us seeing the market sort of rallying and after we saw it volatile for the last 3 weeks?
I think that we're going to struggle to sustain a rally. I mean, I think, as the market sells off, we may see a couple of, if we have a strength for a few days, then we may see some profit taking. And then, when the pricing kind of weakens, then we'll see some people coming in on account of cheap valuations. I think that there are many international guys that are looking at this market and they've seen an improvement in sentiment from a bottom-up perspective, particularly for the banking sector. But the top-down concerns, both globally and for Nigeria, still generate an element of caution. And I also think that internationals are reluctant to keep buying if the domestic players are not. So I think that there's still a bit of a way to go before we see a sustained rally, in this market. And of course, we're coming into the summer, when typically investors are more muted in their activity, and then we may well see strengthening, into September and the end of the year if some of these issues that are on the horizon have been resolved by then.
Well, I want to talk about oil and gas stocks. We saw them not performing so well. Total lost about 6 naira, Cornell about 120 naira. But we did see Forte Oil up just about 50 kobo. Now, how much has the recent announcements by the Minister of Finance that subsidy payments to oil marketers will be delayed until, of course, the investigation by the ad hoc committee into the subsidy is over? How much has this affected sentiment for oil and gas stocks?
Well, I think that clearly that's not a positive development, and there is no way that such an announcement would be received positively by investors in those stocks. I mean, it's not clear how long the probe or investigation is going to take. I understand that liquidity for sovereign debt notes has dried up, so it's difficult for the market that normally would provide some liquidity for the oil marketers. There doesn't seem to be any bid for them, even if they are holding notes, and the government is not going to issue any more. If this goes on for a long period, there could be some liquidity pressure for these guys from a working capital point of view, which could cause them to have to go back to the banks and take working capital loans. And as you know, we're in a very high interest rate environment. Banks are relatively risk averse, and they also have the option of holding relatively high yielding short-term government paper. So it would be clearly a cost of operations that is negative for the oil marketers if this situation goes on for too long.
Now, you did mention earlier some of the international effects that we're seeing in our market. Of course, we know that majority of our investors in our equity markets are offshore investors. Also, some of the effects we're seeing in our fixed income market are as a result of offshore investors pulling out. Now, we do know there will be a Greek election this weekend. What effect, I mean, there has been debate over the effect the events in the Eurozone will have on our markets, but what effect do you think this will have on our markets, the outcome of some of these events?
Well, as far as the Greek elections are concerned, I think it's an important event, not simply because Greece in itself is the key concern in Europe. I mean, clearly there are many other, and some would argue far bigger issues than actually what is going on specifically in the Greek economy. But if the Greek elections are won by those who are not too constructive about making the necessary adjustments to maintain a presence in the Eurozone, then the viability of the bailout plan starts to be called into question. And if that is the case, then the question is asked about how, if Greece is to exit, how is that exit managed? Spain is kind of also in a very weak position. Moody's downgraded the sovereign by 3 notches overnight, and they're seeing borrowing costs soaring well above 6%, nearer towards 7%, which is deemed to be untenable unsustainable for the Spanish sovereign. So when all these things are happening, the outlook for the Eurozone is still uncertain. The German Chancellor is talking about all hands on deck. Germany can't rescue things alone. So there's still a lot of uncertainty about how matters are going to be resolved and how disorderly or not the road will be to arrive at where the Eurozone needs to get to. So whilst that remains the case, I think that there will still be an unwillingness in a broad sense for international investors to commit to frontier markets like ours, where there are vulnerabilities for Nigeria. I mean, let's face it,
yes.
We are very oil sector dependent, and if the disorderly kind of economic developments in the Eurozone, in the US continue, and we see weakness and we see further oil price weakness, this will have a direct impact on Nigeria and on its public sector finances. So it's something to watch.
But I mean, really, let's talk about the outlook for our own economy here in Nigeria. Reports this morning that the Minister of Finance said we should get ready for an economic downturn. Of course, there was also conflicting reports in the news saying the Minister of Information said there's nothing to worry about when it comes to our economy. What are your thoughts on these two sort of contradictions? Should we be worried about an economic downturn? And of course, how is this going to impact offshore investors who are already having problems at home and are hearing of more problems here in Nigeria?
Well, I think it's kind of an optimistic statement to say Nigeria has nothing to worry about. If more diversified and stronger economies than ours are worrying, then I think Nigeria should also be concerned. I think the point that I understood the finance minister to be making, at least as reported in the press, was that the conditions globally were weakening, not strengthening, and as a result, Nigeria would be better positioned the stronger its own domestic position is. And she was making specific reference to government spending and the need for a tightening of purse strings and a saving of government resources. So, if we think about things like the drawdown on the excess crude account and a stronger accretion to reserves, those kinds of things are what enable economies like ours to be able to navigate broader economic difficulties better. So my understanding was not that she was suggesting that Nigeria was going to be plunged into a recession any minute, but just that the global outlook was weakening and that Nigeria will be better off if they batten down the hatches rather than carried, spending loosely and not preparing for the rainy day that seems ever closer.